My name's Dana Kessler, and until last October, I worked as a traveling home health nurse for a small agency out of Marlinton, West Virginia, covering patients scattered across Pocahontas County, Hillsborough, Buckeye, out toward Droop Mountain, places where the GPS just gives up and shows a blue dot floating in green nothing. I'd been doing the job 4 years by then. I liked it, actually. I liked driving my little Subaru up hollows with my medical bag on the passenger seat, listening to whatever AM station would come in through the static, stopping to let deer cross. It felt like real work, the kind where you could see exactly what good you'd done by the end of the visit. I want to say up front that I still don't fully understand what happened with Mr. Andrick. I've turned it over so many times, I've worn the memory smooth in some places and raw in others, and I don't think I'll ever get a version of it that makes complete sense. But I'm going to tell it the way it happened, as close as I can get. I picked up the case in early September. New patient, referred from the hospital in Lewisburg after a fall. Wendell Andrick, 78, lived alone at the end of Beartown Road, which isn't the state park Beartown, just a gravel offshoot that shares the name, maybe 6 miles outside Hillsborough. Diabetic, needed wound care on his lower leg twice a week, plus a general check on meds and vitals. Standard stuff. The intake note said he lived alone, no listed next of kin except a nephew in Ohio who apparently hadn't visited in years. The house itself was the kind you see a lot out there, single story, or a porch that sagged on the left side like it was tired of holding itself up. There was a chain-link dog pen out back with no dog in it, just a rusted bowl and a stake with a length of chain still clipped to it. I remember noticing that on my first visit and thinking, well, that's sad. Wonder what happened to the dog. I didn't think anything else of it. Not then. Wendell was a quiet man, gaunt in that specific way diabetics get, with big knuckly hands and pale blue eyes that didn't track quite right, cataracts starting, though he refused to see anyone about it. He wasn't unfriendly, just distant, like he was listening to something behind you the whole time you talked. First visit went fine. Wound wasn't infected, vitals were okay-ish, blood sugar a little high but nothing alarming. I did my paperwork sitting at his kitchen table, which had a plastic tablecloth with a faded rooster pattern and a glass ashtray, even though I never saw him smoke. It was on my second visit, the following Tuesday, that I first noticed the trail cam. It was mounted on a fence post about 30 feet from his front door, one of those green camo hunting cameras, the kind with the infrared flash for night shots. Pointed not into the woods, but back at the house. Specifically, I realized, after a second look, at the driveway and the front porch. Didn't elaborate. I let it go. Lots of people out there have trouble with bears getting into trash, coyotes, that kind of thing. I didn't think about it again until my third visit, when I noticed a second camera, this one zip-tied to the porch railing itself, angled toward the driveway where I parked. I'll admit that one bothered me a little more, because it meant every time I pulled in, every time I walked from my car to his door, I was on camera. I asked him again, a little more directly this time, what exactly he was trying to catch. He was quiet for a second, working his jaw the way old men do, and then he said, "Not what," and that was all he'd give me. I want to be honest and say that at the time, I mostly filed this under cranky, isolated old man, which, working home health in a rural county, is a category I had plenty of experience with. Loneliness does strange things to people. I finished the visit, did the wound care, checked his sugar, and drove home along Beartown Road with the windows down because it was still warm that week. And I didn't think much more about it until that night, when I was making dinner and got a text from an unknown number. It said, "You should tell Wendell to stop." That was it. No name, no explanation. I remember standing at my stove with the phone in my hand, feeling this cold little drop in my stomach, the kind you get when something doesn't add up but you can't say why, and got nothing. I called the number, and it rang twice and went to a generic voicemail box, no name recorded. I didn't sleep great that night. I kept thinking about the two cameras, both pointed at the driveway, both pointed at where I stood. I told myself it was probably a wrong number, or some prank, or maybe even one of Wendell's neighbors who had some kind of feud going with him. Rural roads out there, Feuds run for decades over property lines and worse. I almost called it in to my supervisor at the agency, then didn't, because it felt like nothing, the kind of thing that sounds paranoid out loud. That's the trap with this stuff. Every single piece of it sounds like nothing by itself. My next visit was Friday. When I pulled up, I noticed a third camera. This one was new, still had the plastic film on part of the housing, mounted up in a tree at the edge of his yard, angled down the driveway toward the road, meaning it would catch anyone coming or going, well before they reached the house. Wendell was sitting on the porch when I got there, not moving, just watching me park. He watched me the whole walk from the car to the steps. He asked before I even said hello. I stopped on the bottom step. Because he does that, Wendell said, sends people messages. I asked who he was. Wendell's jaw did that working thing again, and he looked past me, out toward the road, and said, "My nephew, used to." Then he wouldn't say anything else about it, changed the subject to his blood sugar readings, wanted to know if the numbers looked bad. I did the visit, I didn't push. But driving home that day, I kept checking my mirrors the whole 6 miles down Beartown Road, and I hated that I was doing it, because it felt stupid, and I did it anyway. That weekend, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I looked up the nephew's name from the intake paperwork, a man named Curtis Andrick, and searched him. Found a Facebook profile, mostly private, but the profile picture was a heavy-set man in his 40s standing in front of a truck, and one public post from about a year and a half back, a status that just said, in all caps, "Watch your back, old man, this ain't over," tagged at a location that geotagged to Hillsboro, WV. No responses on it, no context. I sat there in my kitchen looking at that post for a long time. I didn't call the police. I want to be honest about that, because in hindsight, maybe I should have, but nothing had actually happened. A weird text, an old Facebook post, some trail cameras. None of that is a crime. None of that is even really a threat you can point to. I told myself I'd keep an eye on things and mention it to my supervisor Monday, low-key, just to have it on record. I didn't get the chance, because Monday morning, before my shift even started, I got a call from dispatch at the agency saying Wendell hadn't answered his check-in call, and could I do a wellness visit on my way through. Nothing unusual in that by itself. Cell service out there drops constantly. Old men forget to charge phones. I drove out around 10 that morning. The first thing I noticed from the end of the driveway was that all 3 trail cameras were gone. Not knocked down, not lying broken on the ground. Gone, the zip ties cut clean, the fence post mount empty, even the tree camera's mounting strap missing. Someone had taken all 3 carefully sometime between Friday and that morning. Wendell's truck was still in the driveway. The front door was shut but unlocked. I called his name from the porch, knocked, waited, called again, and when nobody answered, I let myself in the way I was trained to for wellness checks. The kitchen was empty, dishes from what looked like one meal in the sink, TV off. His bedroom door was shut. I knocked on that too, said his name, and when there was no answer, I opened it. He wasn't there. Bed was made, or at least undisturbed, like nobody had slept in it that night. What I remember most clearly, the detail that has stuck with me hardest out of this whole thing, was that on his nightstand, sitting neatly on top of his folded reading glasses, was a small stack of Polaroid photos. I picked them up without really thinking about whether I should. They were pictures of me, getting out of my car in his driveway, walking up his porch step, one taken through what looked like his kitchen window, of me sitting at his table doing paperwork on my second visit, the one where I joked about the trail cam. I stood in that bedroom for what felt like a full minute just holding those photos, and the house was completely silent, except for a clock ticking somewhere. And I remember becoming aware, in a slow, creeping way, that I had no idea if I was alone in that house. I called 911 from the driveway, not the bedroom. I don't fully know why I felt like I needed to be outside to make that call, except that something in me didn't want to say the word missing out loud inside those walls. The county sheriff's department came out, 2 deputies, and I gave my statement, showed them the photos, told them about the texts and the cameras and Curtis Andrick's Facebook post. They took it seriously enough to put out a welfare search, checked with the Ohio address on file for the nephew, And here's where it gets strange in a different way. Curtis Andrick had died 8 months earlier. Car accident on I-77. According to an obituary, a deputy pulled up on his phone right there in Wendell's driveway. 8 months before any of this started, before the texts, before the trail cameras. Wendell said we're meant to catch. They never found Wendell. Not that day, not in the search that followed over the next 2 weeks, which covered the woods around the property, the old strip mine roads nearby, the creek. His truck never moved. No sign of forced entry, no blood, nothing to suggest violence. Just a made bed and a stack of photographs and 3 missing cameras. The case is still technically open, according to the deputy I spoke with a few months later when I called to check, though he was honest enough to tell me that after this long, they don't expect a different outcome than the one everybody's quietly assuming. I kept my copy of the photos for a while. The sheriff's office scanned them and let me keep the originals, since I'd been the one who found them, which in hindsight maybe wasn't procedurally correct, but nobody stopped me. I don't have them anymore. I burned them in my fire pit about 2 months after, on a night I won't pretend was a rational decision, more of an I need this out of my house decision. I remember the smell of the Polaroid chemicals burning, sharper and more chemical than I expected. I quit doing rural home visits about 6 weeks after. Told my supervisor it was a work-life balance thing, which wasn't entirely a lie. I work intake now, phone-based, safely inside an office in Beckley. I don't get to see patients' faces anymore, which some days I miss. The thing that still gets me, the detail I never got an answer for and never will, is who sent that first text. You should tell Wendell to stop. Stop what? I still don't know. Stop putting up the cameras, maybe. Or stop something else entirely that I was never told about. If it was Curtis Andrick sending it, he'd been dead for months already. If it wasn't him, I don't know who else would have known to reference him at all, or known my number, which I never gave to anyone in that family. Sometimes when I'm driving at night, even here in Beckley, on a stretch of road with no other headlights around, I'll glance in my rear view and think about those cameras, all angled the same direction, all pointed at the driveway where I used to park. I think about how long someone would have needed to watch that spot to know exactly when I usually arrived, exactly which window to stand at to get that photo of me at the kitchen table. I never told the sheriff's department the last thing because it seemed too small to matter, and I didn't want to sound like I was making things up for attention. But the morning I found the photos, before I even went inside, I noticed the porch light was on. It was 10 in the morning, bright out. No reason for a porch light to be lit unless somebody had turned it on the night before and never turned it back off before morning came. Story 2. Route 16 after midnight. I'm Renee Ashworth, and for about a year and a half, from early 2024 into the summer of 2025, I worked the overnight shift at a gas station on Route 16 outside Welch, West Virginia, down in McDowell County. If you know that stretch of road, you know it. Twisting 2-lane blacktop cut through the mountains, guardrails rusted through in places, cell service that comes and goes like it's teasing. The station was a marathon, one of those old ones with the awning lights that buzz, sitting at a bend in the road, with basically nothing around it for miles, except coal trucks and the occasional house tucked back in a hollow. I took the overnight shift because it paid $2 more an hour than days, and because I was saving up to move to Beckley for community college, and because, honestly, I liked the quiet. Most nights it was just me, the hum of the coolers, and whatever podcast I had going low on my phone behind the counter. We got truckers, mostly, coming through on their routes, a handful of regulars, coal miners coming off third shift, one older woman named Pearl who'd come in around 3 a.m. every night for a pack of basic lights and a coffee, never said much beyond thank you. I want to describe the man from Pump 3 before I get into what happened, because by the time it mattered, I'd already seen him probably a dozen times over 2 months, and each time he registered a little differently in my head, which I think is part of what makes this whole thing so hard to explain clean. He started coming in around late April. Always drove a dark green Ford pickup, older model, no plates that I ever thought to check until it was too late to matter. He'd fill up at Pump 3, every time pump 3, even when the others were open, and come in for a black coffee and sometimes a pack of gum. Mid-40s maybe, thin, always wore a ball cap pulled low, one of those plain tan ones with no logo. Polite. Said evening when he came in, said thank you ma'am when he left. Nothing about him seemed wrong, not at first. Rural gas stations get all kinds at 2 a.m. But the first thing that snagged in my memory, looking back, was small. I remember laughing a little, because it was true, but it was also just not something a stranger buying coffee should know off the top of his head. I said something like guilty, and he smiled and left. I told myself he was just observant, the kind of regular who notices patterns. I didn't think about it again for maybe 3 weeks. Late May, a Thursday, 2:13 a.m., according to the receipt log I still have a photo of on my old phone. He came in for his coffee like usual, and while I was ringing him up, he said, "You drive that little gray Honda, right?" I felt something cold move through my chest, because I do drive a gray Honda, and I do live on a street that could reasonably be called Maple, though it's actually Maplewood Court in Welch proper, a good 15-minute drive from the station. I asked him, trying to keep my voice light, how he knew where I lived. He just said small town, and paid in exact change and left. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I remember sitting on my couch with the blinds shut, going over it in my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Small town, sure, maybe he'd seen my car around. Maybe I'd mentioned my street to someone who mentioned it to someone else. This is coal country. Everybody's cousin knows everybody's business. But I hadn't told anyone at that station where I lived. Not my manager, not my coworker Marcus, who covered the shift before mine. I was careful about that specifically because of the job. Because a gas station on a dark highway with mostly cash transactions at odd hours is exactly the kind of place where you learn early to keep your personal information to yourself. I told Marcus about it the next time our shifts overlapped. Marcus was a big guy, ex-military, worked days mostly, but picked up my Friday closing shift sometimes so I could have one weekend night off. He didn't dismiss it the way I was half expecting. I said maybe, and he started swinging by around 1 or 2 on the nights he thought the truck might show, sitting in the back room doing paperwork, staying close. For 2 weeks after that, the green truck didn't come. I let myself relax a little, told myself maybe he'd clocked that I'd noticed. Maybe he'd moved on to whatever this was about, if it was about anything at all. Then, second week of June, a Tuesday, he came back, but this time, not to the pump. He parked at the far edge of the lot, near the propane cage, headlights off, and just sat there. I could see the shape of him in the driver's seat under the sodium lights from the awning, not moving, not coming. I called Marcus. He couldn't come that night, told me to call the sheriff's non-emergency line if the truck stayed put, which I did. It took the deputy almost 40 minutes to get out there, which tells you something about how thin coverage is in that county at night. And by the time he arrived, the truck was gone. The deputy walked the lot with his flashlight, found nothing, told me to keep a log if it happened again, gave me a card. I kept that card in the drawer under the register for the rest of my time there. He came back 3 more times over the following month, always the same. Parked at the edge of the lot, headlights off, never coming inside, never staying more than maybe 20 minutes before pulling out. I started keeping the store's baseball bat, which had lived dusty behind the cigarette case since before I even worked there, propped against the counter where I could reach. I started parking my car directly under the one working security camera instead of in my usual spot by the ice machine. I started, without really deciding to, checking the lot through the window every few minutes instead of every 20. The last time I saw him was July 9th, a date I remember exactly because it was 2 days before my 22nd birthday. It was 3:52 in the morning. Pearl had just left with her cigarettes, and I was alone in the store. I heard the bell over the door before I saw him, which was wrong because he'd never once come inside during any of the parking lot visits. He walked up to the counter slowly, hands in his jacket pockets, and for the first time since April, he didn't order anything. He just stood there looking at me, and then he said, in this quiet, almost gentle voice, "You did good, calling the sheriff." Then he said, "I'm not going to be coming around here anymore." And he left. Didn't buy anything. Got in the green truck and pulled out onto 16 heading toward the West Virginia-Kentucky line, taillights disappearing around the bend, and I never saw that truck again. I want to say that was the end of it. And mechanically, it was. He never came back to that station, not once, in the year I kept working there afterward. But I quit thinking about it as over, a lot slower than the actual visits stopped. For months, I'd catch myself watching headlights turn into the lot too slow, watching for a truck that never came. I moved apartments twice in the following year, once for the community college move I'd already planned, and once earlier than that, in August, for no reason I ever gave anyone, except that I didn't like how well he'd known my old. Here's the detail that still sits wrong with me, the one I never got an answer to. About 4 months after that last visit, I was helping Marcus close out the register tapes for some inventory audit, going back through old transaction logs on the store's ancient computer system, and I found something I hadn't thought to check before: the Pump 3 fuel log going back to April. Every single time that truck filled up, it paid in cash, exact change, no card ever run. Except once. One transaction, back in early May, ran on a card before switching to cash for the rest, like whoever it was had made a mistake and caught it. I asked Marcus if we could pull that one record. It took him a week of asking around with our card processor to even get someone on the phone about it. And when he finally did, they told him that particular transaction had come back as declined, then voided. No card number retained in their system past 90 days. We never found out who he was. Never got a plate number, since he never sat close enough to the one working light for me to read it. And by the time I thought to actually try, he'd already stopped coming. The sheriff's deputy filed my incident reports, but with no plate, no name, no actual crime committed. Sitting in a parking lot isn't illegal, and knowing where I lived, as unsettling as it was, isn't either. There was nothing more they could do. I still think about that last thing he said sometimes. "You did good calling the sheriff." I respect that. Like it had been some kind of test the whole time, and I'd passed it, and that's why he stopped. I don't know what I would have needed to do differently for it to have gone worse. I try not to think about that part too. Story 3, the Sears house on Cutlip Hollow. My name's Priya Naidu, and in the fall of 2025 I was a grad student at West Virginia University doing field work for my thesis, which was on Appalachian oral folklore. The kind of project that sounds academic and tidy until you're the one driving alone into a hollow with a digital recorder and a consent form, trying to convince 80-year-olds to talk to you about things their grandparents told them not to talk about. My advisor had lined me up with a rental for 6 weeks. A little house outside Webster Springs, off a gravel road called Cutlip Hollow, which is a real place, though I've since found out most people local to the area avoid saying its name after dark, which I did not know until it was already too late. The house was one of those old Sears kit houses, mail-order homes people built from a catalog back in the early 1900s. This one, probably built sometime in the 20s based on what the woman I rented it from told me. When I asked what she meant by that, she just said, "History, folks," and changed the subject. The house itself was small, 2 bedrooms, a wood stove, decent plumbing for its age, and it sat about a quarter-mile back from the nearest neighbor, down a gravel drive with trees close on both sides. I want to be honest that I loved it there, at first. It felt like exactly the kind of isolation you want for this kind of work. No distractions, just me, my transcription equipment, and stacks of library photocopies about folk beliefs, home remedies, and what people out there used to call haint stories, which is an old term for ghost stories. Though the folklore is more complicated than that word really. The first 3 weeks were uneventful in the way fieldwork mostly is. A lot of driving to sit in someone's kitchen for 2 hours to get 20 minutes of usable recording, a lot of instant coffee, a lot of nights transcribing until my eyes blurred. The thing I want to flag now in hindsight that I dismissed at the time was that almost every single person I interviewed when they found out where I was staying got quiet in a specific way, not dramatic. I laughed and said no, and she said give it time, and wouldn't elaborate no matter how I pushed, just moved the conversation along like she regretted bringing it up. I started hearing things in week 4. I want to be precise about this because I've told this story enough times now that I catch myself embellishing if I'm not careful, and I don't want to do that here. What I heard, starting around the second week of October, was footsteps. Not every night. Maybe 3 or 4 times over about 10 days. Always upstairs where I wasn't sleeping. I'd set up my bedroom on the ground floor, in what must have originally been a sitting room, because the upstairs got cold, and I didn't want to deal with the wood stove reaching that far. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, floorboard to floorboard, the kind of sound a person makes walking carefully in a house they know. I'd lie there at, I want to say, usually somewhere between 1 and 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was the house settling, old wood contracting in the cold. And mostly I believed that, because the alternative was worse, and because nothing else was happening to make me think otherwise. The thing that shifted it for me, that moved it from old house sounds into something I couldn't rationalize away as easily, happened on a Tuesday night in the last week of October. I recorded it, thanked him, thought it was great material, drove home not thinking much else of it. That night, around 1:40 a.m. by my phone, I woke to the footsteps again, upstairs, same slow, deliberate pace. And then, for the first time, they stopped directly above my bedroom, and I heard very clearly the specific sound of something being dragged. Not a heavy drag, more like furniture legs being scooted a few inches at a time, pause, scoot again. I lay there frozen for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably closer to 2, and then it just stopped. Silence. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, first thing, I went upstairs, which I'd honestly barely done in 4 weeks of living there, mostly using the space to store extra boxes. Both bedrooms up there were basically empty, except for a few pieces of furniture the owner had left. A dresser, an old iron bed frame with no mattress. I checked the floor for drag marks, scuff patterns, anything, and found nothing conclusive, though the dust in that room was disturbed in a way that could have meant anything or nothing. I'm a folklorist, not a forensic investigator, and I want to be honest that I don't actually know how to read that kind of evidence reliably. I called the owner that day, more to ask a practical question than anything. I asked if there'd ever been any issues with animals getting into the upstairs, raccoons or squirrels in the walls, something that could explain sounds. She said not that she knew of, house was pretty sealed up. I asked her what she meant. She said carefully, like she was choosing the words, "My aunt didn't like going up those stairs the last few years she lived there. Never really said why." I asked if anyone had ever died, and she said not that she knew, but that the house had been in the family since it was built, and she genuinely didn't know all of what had happened in it across 100 years, which felt like an honest answer, even though it didn't help me. I'll be transparent that at this point, I did the thing I probably should have done from the beginning of the strange stuff. I set up my field recorder overnight, the same digital recorder I used for interviews, positioned on the stairs, running from midnight to 6. What I got back the next morning was 30 seconds of audio, starting around 1:52 a.m., of footsteps, clear as anything, moving across what would have been the upstairs hallway. And then, at the tail end of the clip, very faint, almost under the noise floor of the recorder, what sounds like a woman's voice saying something short. I've had 3 different people listen to it since, and I've gotten 3 different interpretations of what the words are. A third insists it's not words at all, just the recorder picking up wind through a gap somewhere, which is possible. The house wasn't perfectly sealed, and I want to hold space for that explanation, because I genuinely don't know which is true. I stayed 4 more nights after that recording, which in hindsight surprises me more than almost anything else in this story. That I stayed at all. Fieldwork funding is tight, and I told myself I couldn't justify breaking the rental early over an unexplained noise and an ambiguous audio clip, and there's a specific, embarrassing kind of academic stubbornness that kept me there longer than I think most people would have stayed. The footsteps came twice more in those 4 nights, both times upstairs, both times stopping directly above my room around the same 1:32 a.m. window. And though nothing was ever dragged again, And there was no more audio like that last recording, no more voice. What finally moved me out wasn't the footsteps at all. It was a smaller thing. And this is the detail I still can't explain and don't expect to ever get an answer for. On my last night there, packing up to leave early the next morning, I found, sitting on the kitchen table where I definitely hadn't left it, one of Garland Sizemore's photocopied logging camp photographs. A print I'd made at the library, part of my research materials, which I'd kept in a folder in a box upstairs in the room I never went into, except that one morning to check for drag marks. The photograph was face up on the table, centered, like someone had placed it there deliberately. It was a group photo of a logging crew from around 1931, 11 men standing in front of a felled tree wider than all of them combined. I have no memory of bringing that specific photocopy downstairs ever, and I've gone back through my research organization system multiple times since trying to find a reasonable explanation for how it got there, and I haven't. I finished my thesis. It did well, actually, got a nice mention at my defense. I never went back to that house, and when I drive through Webster Springs now for other research, which happens maybe once a year, I take the long way around rather than pass the turn for Cutlip Hollow, which I recognize is not a rational academic response to an unexplained noise and one ambiguous photograph, and I've made peace with the fact that I don't need it to be rational. I just don't go back. Story 4, the standing order on Persinger Ridge. I'm Tobias Wren, and I drive for a regional propane and grocery delivery outfit based out of Lewisburg, West Virginia. The kind of job that doesn't exist in most of the country anymore, but still does out here, where some folks up in the hollows are 70, 80 years old, no driver's license, no way into town except what somebody brings. I'd been doing the route for about 3 years by the fall of 2024 when this happened, driving a box truck up roads that Google Maps refuses to acknowledge as roads, delivering everything from propane tanks to canned goods to prescription pickups from the Rite Aid. Most of my customers were standing orders, same delivery, same day, week after week, month after month. You get to know people that way, even if you only see them for 5 minutes at a time. There was Otis Fiesel up on Droop Mountain who always had a joke ready. There was the Caudill sisters, both in their 90s, who lived together and always tried to send me home with a jar of something canned. And then there was the order I want to tell you about, which came from an address on Persinger Ridge, a house I'd never actually seen a person at, not once in almost a year and a half of delivery. The order had been on the books since before I started the route, according to the dispatch log, standing weekly delivery, groceries plus the occasional prescription, paid automatically through some account set up by, according to the file, a woman named Carol Ann Witt. The instructions were always the same. Leave everything on the porch, do not knock, do not wait around. I followed those instructions the way I followed all standing instructions, without thinking much about them, for probably 8 months before anything about it started to feel strange. The house itself sat back off the ridge road, a single wide with an add-on porch built onto the front, half hidden by overgrown rhododendron. First few times I made the delivery, I noticed small things that told me somebody was living there, even though I never saw them. A light on in a back window sometimes, tire tracks in the mud that weren't mine, the previous week's delivered items gone from the porch by the time I came back, replaced by nothing, no note, no trash, nothing. Around month 9, I started noticing something else. Every week, sitting on the porch railing exactly where I'd leave the groceries, there'd be a folded piece of paper, always the same kind of yellow legal pad paper, held down with a rock. I wasn't supposed to interact with anything on the property beyond dropping the delivery, and for a few weeks I just left the notes where they were, figured it was between the customer and dispatch, none of my business. Then one week, setting the grocery box down, the wind caught the note and it fell open right in front of me before I could stop it from blowing off the porch entirely. And I saw, just for a second before I refolded it and set the rock back on it, that it was covered edge to edge in handwriting, tiny and cramped. And the one line I caught clearly, right in the middle, said, "He still comes on Thursdays too." My delivery day was Wednesday. I remember standing there on that porch with the wind picking up, rereading that line in my head, and feeling like I'd walked into the middle of something I didn't have any context for. I put the note back exactly how I'd found it and left, and I didn't think about it again until the following Wednesday, when there was a new note in the same spot. And this time, I'll admit, I looked at it on purpose, unfolded it myself before setting it down, telling myself it was fine because dispatch's own instructions never explicitly said not to. That note said, in the same cramped handwriting, "Tell the delivery boy not to use the gravel turnaround anymore. He watches from there." I called dispatch that afternoon, told my supervisor about the notes, asked if there was more context on this customer he could give me. Was there a welfare concern here? Was this an elderly person living alone with some cognitive decline? Was there family I should be aware of? He pulled the file and told me honestly there wasn't much. The account had been set up years back by Carol Ann Witt, auto-pay through a bank account, no other contact listed, no emergency contact, no phone number that still worked when he tried it right there on the call. He said he'd flag it for a wellness check through the county, since the notes did sound like they might indicate somebody in some kind of distress. And he told me in the meantime just to keep making the deliveries as instructed, and to call if anything seemed like an emergency. The wellness check happened about 10 days later, according to what dispatch told me after. A deputy went out, got no answer, but confirmed through a window that the place looked lived in, food in the kitchen, no sign of anyone in medical distress, nothing that met the threshold for forcing entry. The deputy left a card. Dispatch told me to continue the route as normal. I want to describe what happened the next Wednesday, because it's the part of this that I still think about most. I'd started, without really deciding to, avoiding the gravel turnaround the note had mentioned, parking instead a little further down on the shoulder of the ridge road itself, and walking the extra 30 yards up to the porch. That day, walking up, I saw, for the first time in a year and a half, an actual person in the window. Just for a second. A face, pale, close to the glass, gone before I could register more than the shape of it, long enough only to know it was a person, not long enough to say man or woman, old or young. I froze on the path, and after a second, the curtain in that window twitched shut. I finished the delivery fast that day, set the groceries down, didn't look for a note, and left. There wasn't a note that week, which had never happened before in 8 months of them appearing every single time. The following week's note, when it reappeared, said something that I've never fully been able to shake. "You did right, parking where you did. He can't see the porch from the turnaround anymore. Thank you." I called dispatch again after that one, more insistent this time, and my supervisor, to his credit, escalated it further, got the county involved a second time, this time with someone from Adult Protective Services, alongside a deputy. Since the notes were reading less like confusion and more like somebody documenting an actual, ongoing situation they felt unable to get out of on their own. I wasn't part of that visit and don't know everything that happened, but what I was told afterwards secondhand, filtered through my supervisor, was that the woman living there, an older woman, he didn't give me a name, though I've always assumed it was Carol Ann Witt herself, was spoken to, confirmed she lived alone, denied anyone else came around, denied writing any notes at all, seemed by the deputy's account confused but not in immediate danger. And the case was closed on their end without further action, since nobody can force an adult who denies distress to accept help. She says she doesn't. I kept making that delivery every Wednesday for another 4 months after that, until I left the company in early 2025 for a different job. The notes kept coming, every week, though never again as direct as those two. Mostly small things after that, thank yous, once a request for a specific brand of soup that wasn't on her usual order, ordinary customer notes, the kind you'd expect from anybody. I told myself, the way you do, that maybe it had resolved itself, whatever it was, or maybe it had never been what I thought it was in the first place. Maybe I'd built a story out of an isolated, anxious old woman's private worries that had nothing to do with any actual person coming around on Thursdays. I don't know that for certain though, because of the last thing that happened, my final delivery before I left that job. I set the box down, and there was no note that week. But there was, sitting where the note usually was, a small object instead. A single spent shotgun shell, empty, standing upright on its base, right where the rock usually held the paper down. Nothing written on it, no note alongside it, just the shell itself, standing there deliberately placed, facing the road. I never delivered to that address again after that. I don't know who replaced me on the route, whether the standing order is even still active, whether Carol Ann Witt, if that's who she was, is still living in that house on Persinger Ridge. I think about her sometimes when I'm driving deliveries on my current job, which keeps me mostly in town now, safer roads, more people around. I think about that face in the window, there and then gone. And about a woman writing notes to a stranger who left her groceries once a week, because he was apparently the only person listening to her at all. Story 5, The House on Turkey Foot Run. My name's Marisol Deaton, and in January of 2025, my husband Cole and I bought a house outside Hinton, West Virginia, down along a road called Turkey Foot Run, an actual road that runs along the creek of the same name in Summers County. We'd moved from Charlotte, where we'd both grown up, chasing something simpler, cheaper, quieter. Cole's a remote software developer. I do freelance medical billing, and neither of us needed to be anywhere in particular. So when we found a 100-year-old farmhouse on 4 acres for less than a third of what a starter home cost back home, we jumped. The house had been empty for almost 2 years before we bought it, belonging to an estate that had been tied up in some family dispute after the previous owner, an elderly man named Harlan Boggs, died. The realtor mentioned this plainly, no drama in her voice, just facts, natural causes, found by a neighbor after a few days, nothing that struck either of us as a red flag. We're not superstitious people. We didn't ask if anyone had died in the house the way some buyers apparently do. We just liked the wraparound porch, the view of the ridge, the low price. We moved in the first week of February, and for the first month it was everything we wanted. Cold, clear mornings, wood smoke smell in the air, the kind of silence at night you can't get in a city, just wind and the occasional owl. I want to be clear that nothing about the house itself ever felt wrong. It was the property, or more specifically, something about how close it sat to the road and how visible our windows were from it, that turned out to matter. The first strange thing happened in early March, a Tuesday evening, around 6:40 p.m. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Cole was upstairs on a work call, and I glanced out the window over the sink and saw a man standing at the edge of our property, right where our yard met the road, just standing there, hands in his coat pockets, looking at the house, not walking, not doing anything except looking. I watched him for probably 30 seconds before he turned and walked off down the road, unhurried, like he had every reason to be there. I mentioned it to Cole that night, and we both agreed it was probably nothing. Maybe an old neighbor of Harlan's, curious about who'd moved in, small town. He came back the following week. Same spot, same stance, this time closer to dusk, maybe 7:15. Hard to make out his face in the fading light, except that he was older, gray hair under a ball cap, medium build. He stayed longer that time, maybe 2 full minutes, before walking off in the same unhurried way. This time I went out on the porch and called out, asked if he needed something, and he just lifted a hand in something between a wave and a dismissal and kept walking. Didn't answer. We asked around at the little store in town, the only real gathering spot for gossip out there, described him to the woman who ran the register, and she thought for a second and said it might be Dale Sponogle, who apparently lived a couple miles off and had been close with Harlan Boggs, maybe even helped out around the property in his last years. She said Dale had taken Harlan's death hard, kept to himself. It made a kind of sense, an old friend, maybe grieving, maybe just curious or uneasy about strangers in his old buddy's house. We let it go, except it kept happening, and it kept escalating in small increments that are hard to describe individually, but that added up to something I couldn't ignore. Late March, I found the gate to our driveway open one morning, which we always kept latched, no clear sign of forced entry, nothing taken, nothing disturbed, just open. Early April, Cole found footprints in the mud along the side of the house, beneath our bedroom window, specifically. boot prints, size that matched an adult man, leading from the road, along the side yard, stopping right under that window, and then leading back out the same way. We called the sheriff's office that time. A deputy came out, took a report, photographed the prints, told us honestly that without a name or a face caught on camera, there wasn't much more he could do beyond noting it, and suggested we get security cameras, which we did that same week. The cameras confirmed what I already half believed. Over the next month, we caught the same man, and I'm fairly confident now it was Dale Sponogle, based on the description matching what the store clerk had told us. On our driveway camera 4 separate times, always at dusk or just after dark, always just standing at the property line, sometimes walking part way up the drive before turning back. One night, the camera caught him standing directly beneath our bedroom window for almost 6 full minutes, motionless, just standing there in the dark, looking up at the glass, before walking away. We went to the sheriff's office in person after that clip, showed the footage, and this time it was enough to prompt a visit to Dale Sponogle's actual address, which a deputy did, coming back to tell us that Dale had admitted to walking past the property out of habit. Said he and Harlan used to sit on that porch most evenings for 30 years. Said he wasn't trying to scare anyone, just missed his friend and found himself walking that road out of old routine. The deputy said he'd been given a clear warning to stay off our property, and legally, that was about as far as things could go without an actual trespassing charge tied to a specific violation after the... I wanted to believe that explanation. Grief does strange things, and 30 years of evening visits to a porch is a hard habit to just stop. For about 3 weeks after that warning, we didn't see him at all, and I let myself relax, told myself it really had been exactly what it sounded like. Sad, a little unsettling, but ultimately harmless. Then, the second week of May, I woke up at 3:20 in the morning to the sound of our back door. Not the front, the back, which faces away from the road entirely, toward the woods. A door we never really used and kept a chair pushed against out of habit more than security. Being tried, the handle turning slowly, once, then stopping. I woke Cole. We both lay there in the dark listening, and after maybe a full minute of silence, we heard footsteps moving away from the door, around the side of the house, toward the front. Unhurried, deliberate, and then nothing. We called 911 that time, and a deputy came out within 20 minutes, walked the property with a flashlight, found nothing, no one, though the ground near the back door was soft enough that he pointed out fresh boot prints, same size as before, leading away into the tree line behind our property, and not toward the road at all, meaning whoever it was hadn't walked up from Dale Sponogle's usual route, but had come and gone through the woods, which back up eventually onto state forest land. Land that connects, if you're determined enough and know the terrain, to a wide stretch of rural properties with no easy way to trace which direction someone actually came from. When they went back to speak with Dale Sponogle again after that incident, he denied it entirely, said he'd been home all night. And this is the part that has genuinely never sat right with either me or Cole. His account seemed to check out. A neighbor of his confirmed his truck hadn't left his property that night. There was no way, as far as the deputy could determine, that Dale Sponogle was the person who'd tried our back door at 3:20 in the morning. We put in a second, better security system after that, motion lit the whole property, got a dog, a big shepherd mix named Otis, who sleeps in our bedroom now, and has never once in the year and a half since given us any indication that something's out there. No barking at nothing, no pacing at the window, which I've chosen to take as reassurance, even though I know that's not really evidence of anything, either way. Dale Sponogle still walks that road sometimes. We still see him occasionally in the distance, though he's kept to the road itself since the warning, never crossed onto the property again as far as we've caught on camera. We've mostly made peace with him being exactly what he says he is, a grieving old man who can't quite let go of 30 years of evening habit. What we've never made peace with, what still keeps me up some nights when Cole's asleep and the house is quiet, is the back door. Someone tried that door at 3:20 in the morning, coming and going through the woods instead of the road, deliberately, And to this day, almost 2 years later, we still don't know who that was. Story 6, Marker 14 on the Cranberry Trail. I'm Jordan Blevins, and for 2 seasons, spring through fall of 2024, and again in 2025, I worked seasonal trail maintenance for the Monongahela National Forest, based mostly out of the Cranberry Wilderness area in Pocahontas and Webster Counties, West Virginia. It's real backcountry, no cell service for most of it, trails that see maybe a handful of hikers a week outside peak season, the kind of quiet that either settles into you or gets under your skin, depending on the day. My job was mostly solitary, clearing blowdown, maintaining blazes, checking in on the more remote trail markers, sometimes going 2 or 3 days without seeing another person. I liked that about it. I'd grown up in Elkins, spent my childhood in these woods, and something about the isolation felt less like being alone and more like being exactly where I was supposed to be. That changed some in the back half of my second season. It started with the shelters. Along a lot of these trails, there are old, 3-sided lean-to shelters, mostly for backpackers doing multi-day sections, and part of my rounds included checking them for damage, clearing them out, making sure they were in decent shape. Shelter along a stretch near what's marked as Marker 14 on the Cranberry Trail, an actual trail marker, an old wooden post with a number carved into it, one of maybe 20 scattered through that section, had always been one of my regular stops. Nothing special about it, just a routine part of the loop. Late July 2025, I came through on my normal rotation and found something off inside the shelter. Not damage, not trash, but a small arrangement of stones on the dirt floor, maybe a dozen of them, laid out in a rough circle, deliberate, not the kind of thing that happens by accident or weather. I didn't think much of it. Hikers do strange little things sometimes, cairns, arrangements, nothing that struck me as more than a passing curiosity. I cleared it, moved on with my rounds, didn't log it as anything unusual. I found a similar arrangement 2 weeks later. Same shelter, different pattern, this time not a circle but a rough spiral, stones getting smaller toward the center. And this time, sitting at the center of the spiral, there was a small, carved wooden figure, maybe 3 inches tall, crude, human-like, whittled from what looked like a single piece of birch. I picked it up, turned it over, found nothing marked on it, no initials, nothing. I logged that one in my field notes, mostly out of professional habit, and mentioned it in passing to my supervisor, Hal Kessinger, back at the ranger station. He didn't seem concerned, said backcountry folks leave all kinds of things at shelters, some of it religious, some of it just strange, and left it there. I want to describe what happened over the following 6 weeks in the order it happened, because I think the order matters. The way each thing built on the last is a big part of why it got to me the way it did, rather than any single piece of it being dramatic on its own. Early August, I found the shelter's fire ring, normally cold ash from whatever backpackers had used it last, freshly used. Not unusual by itself, except that my rounds put me there on a Tuesday and Thursday cycle, and I'd been there Tuesday with the ring cold, and was back Thursday to find fresh ash, meaning somebody had a fire there in a 2-day window during a stretch of trail that, according to the permit log at the ranger station, had no registered overnight stays booked for that shelter at all. Mid-August, the wooden figure was gone from the center of the spiral, but the stones themselves had been rearranged again. This time into a shape I can only describe as roughly the outline of a human figure, laid out full length on the dirt floor of the shelter, arms and legs distinctly marked out in stone. Late August, I came through on a Thursday afternoon, maybe 2 p.m., full daylight, and found, propped against the inside wall of the shelter, a hand-carved walking stick I didn't recognize, and beside it, written directly into the dirt floor, with what looked like a stick or finger, the words, "You've been coming here a while." That one I did report properly, filed an actual incident log with Hal and with the district ranger, described everything from the start, including the stones and the figure, which in hindsight I probably should have flagged earlier. They took it seriously enough to have a law enforcement ranger walk the section with me the following week, though by the time we got there, the message had been scuffed out, whether by weather or by someone, and the walking stick was gone. No new stone arrangement had appeared. The ranger logged it, said they'd keep an eye on permit patterns for that section, but without any actual crime having occurred. Trespassing on national forest land isn't the same violation it would be on private property, and leaving objects in a public shelter isn't illegal at all. There wasn't much more official action to take. I kept doing my rounds. I want to be honest that I thought about requesting a different section, and part of me wishes now I had, but the Cranberry loop was mine, had been for 2 seasons. And there was a stubbornness in me that didn't want to hand it off over something I still couldn't fully prove was even threatening, as opposed to just straying. The last thing happened in mid-September, a few weeks before the season wound down for the year. I came through on a Tuesday, standard rotation, weather turning cold already at that elevation, and found the shelter completely empty. No stones, no messages, nothing. Cleaner than I'd ever seen it, like someone had swept it out entirely. I remember standing there feeling almost more unsettled by the emptiness than I had been by any of the arrangements, because at least those had given me something to react to. I did my usual check, noted the fire ring was cold and long unused, and turned to head back up the trail toward marker 14 itself, the actual wooden post. Carved into the post, fresh, the wood pale and raw where the old carving of 14 had been, was a second set of markings beneath the number. 3 straight vertical lines, evenly spaced, cut clean and deep, clearly done with a sharp blade and clearly done recently. The wood hadn't even started to weather yet. I stood there for a long moment looking at it, and then I did something I'm not entirely proud of, which is that I left. Didn't investigate further, didn't walk the surrounding brush, looking for signs of a camp or a person. Just turned around and hiked the 4 miles back to my truck faster than I normally would have, checking over my shoulder more than I'd ever admit to have. Most people just stopped talking about it after a season or 2 passed, and nothing happened again. I don't know what those 3 lines meant, if they meant anything at all beyond someone wanting me to know they'd been there, close enough to reach that post. Close enough to have been watching my rotation well enough to know marker 14 was somewhere I'd be, alone, on a predictable day, in a stretch of forest where the nearest other person might be miles away in any direction. I still hike sometimes, off the clock, different sections now, different trails entirely most of the time, but I've never gone back to marker 14, and I don't plan to. 6 stories, 6 different corners of Appalachia, 6 people who went about ordinary lives, a nurse, a gas station clerk, a grad student, a delivery driver, a couple who just wanted a quiet house in the mountains, a trail worker doing rounds nobody else wanted. None of them went looking for anything. That's what gets me about these stories every time I put one of these videos together. Nobody in this one broke into an abandoned house on a dare. Nobody went digging where they shouldn't have. They were just there, living their lives, and something found them anyway. If you've spent any real time in these hollows, you know there's a specific kind of quiet out there. The kind where you can hear somebody's truck engine from half a mile off, where a porch light left on means something, where everybody seems to know a story like one of these, secondhand, about a neighbor or a cousin or somebody their daddy used to know. I hear from a lot of you after these videos with your own version of a Wendell or your own marker 14. If that's you, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments, or if you'd rather stay anonymous, there's a submission link in the description. Some of the best stories I've ever covered on this channel started as a comment nobody else even noted. If tonight's the first time you found this channel, there's a lot more where this came from. Hit subscribe and turn the bell on if you don't want to miss the next one, because we've got another True Stories compilation already in the works. And if you made it through all 6 of these with the lights off, I want to know that too. Stay safe out there. And if you're ever driving one of these back roads late at night and you see somebody standing at the edge of the tree line, watching, don't stop to ask why. I'll see you in the next one.